Chapter 9. Abdul Basit Muhammad, servant of the most straightforward. One day, Abdul Basit Muhammad, son of Abdul Ghaffur, mentioned to his parents that he wished to go out west to spread the word of Islam. They gave him their blessings and reminded him of everything that he had learnt about the Quran and Hadith. Stay true to the legacy of your ancestors and be patient in adversity. Never make Islam a burden for the people. Abdul Basit was well prepared for the journey. He not only was learned in the Quran, Hadith, and Fiqh, but was also an expert at martial arts, which too he had learned from his father in the tradition of his ancestors. He took some food, money, and his most precious sword, and set out on his journey. For 7 days he traveled with different companions going west. On the 7th day he decided to change his route and traveled south. He reached a small oasis in the desert. He made camp, and as he approached the little pond of water, he heard a faint sound, yip, yip, coming from behind a bush. It sounded like an animal in distress. He approached the bush carefully and looked beyond it. The oasis was a tiny little stream of water, and on the edge of it appeared a little dog trapped in the mud struggling to get out. Abdul Basit smiled, and approaching the dog, he reached down and pulled him out of the mud. The dog was no more than a puppy who was frightened and shivering uncontrollably. Abdul Basit washed the mud off him, wrapped him in his spare blanket, and set him close to the fire he had started to cook food. He wondered how the pup had gotten there. He presumed that someone had either abandoned him or tried to drown him. The pup had a scruffy brown coat, not very attractive, but it was the eyes of the pup that intrigued Abdul Basit. The pup stared at him unblinkingly with soulful eyes, and with an intensity and intelligence that Abdul Basit could not understand. It seemed like the pup was trying to tell him something. Abdul Basit offered some food to the dog, and after a short hesitation, the pup ate the food, gulping it down as if he had not eaten for days. Abdul Basit ate his food while the pup kept staring at him. The next day, Abdul Basit packed up his things and set out again, going south. The little pup followed him on his little legs. Abdul Basit would turn around and see him falling behind, and would stop and wait for him. He didn't want to abandon the pup in the middle of nowhere. He decided to pick up the pup and carry him on his journey. 2 days later, Abdul Basit came to a branch in the trail. He decided to follow the left-hand trail, which seemed the easier of the two, but the pup made a big fuss and would dart down the right side trail and run back and forth to him. After watching the pup for a few times, Abdul Basit said, "What is it? Do you want me to go right instead of left?" The pup looked at him and appeared to smile. Abdul Basit decided to follow the dog rather than his own inclination. That night, Abdul Basit camped in a little hollow area in the desert near a small spring of water. In the middle of the night, he was woken up by the pup. He remained very still, trying to listen. Soon he heard the murmuring of voices. Carefully, he looked out from behind his blanket. He saw 3 large men going through his belongings. Stealthily, he rose, and with his sword, and approached the men from behind. Shouting, "Allahu Akbar!" he gave a mighty blow to the biggest of the men who was nearest him, and rendered him unconscious. The other 2 quickly turned around with their swords, and seeing the fate of their leader, rushed at him. Abdul Basit fought as he had been taught by his father. For the next several minutes the fight went back and forth, but then the pup joined the fight. While the pup was a little insignificant thing, it distracted the robbers enough to give Abdul Basit the advantage he needed to disarm the other 2 robbers. He then tied them up, set them in the middle of the hollow, and went back to sleep. In the morning he rose, made breakfast, fed the pup, and said to the pup, "Thank you for helping me last night." Abdul Basit thought it funny that he was talking to a dog, but watching the dog's eyes, he felt that the dog understood his words. The next day, Abdul Basit resumed his journey. Again, he followed the direction the pup wanted him to go. he marched the 3 robbers ahead of him. At the end of the day, they reached a small town. As he entered the town, a crowd began to gather around him. The people were very excited, and Abdul Basit could not understand why all the excitement. He asked one of the people nearest him, "What is the excitement about?" The man replied that these 3 robbers are part of a notorious gang on the other side of the mountain that has terrorized the town over the last several years. Nobody had been able to apprehend them, and it was amazing to see all 3 culprits captured by you single-handedly. Soon the news reached the king, and he sent for Abdul Basit and the robbers. He inquired how Abdul Basit had been able to achieve such a feat. Abdul Basit explained how the little pup had guided him down the path to this town and woken him when the robbers were searching his belongings, and how Abdul Basit had used his sword to disarm them. The king was amazed. He ordered that the culprits be locked up and punished. The king also told him that if he had taken the left fork in the road, it would have led right into the robbers' den. A grand celebration was held in honor of Abdul Basit. The king offered him the position of chief of his bodyguards. Abdul Basit politely declined, saying that he was no warrior, but a humble storyteller. The king asked him to stay for a while in the city as his guest. Abdul Basit agreed to a short stay. One day, not long after Abdul Basit's arrival, there was a huge hue and cry that an army of the king's enemies was approaching the city. All the citizens went to hide, taking their precious possessions with them. The king sent for Abdul Basit and asked him to join his forces to defend the city. Abdul Basit agreed to help. As the 2 forces came together and confronted each other, the champion of the enemy forces stepped forward to challenge the king's army. None of the king's men stepped forward. Abdul Basit picked up his sword and came out to challenge the champion. The champion was in full battle armor with a mighty sword and shield. Abdul Basit had just his sword. Soon the fight began. The champion slashed left and right at Abdul Basit, but he was very nimble, and using the tricks taught to him by his father, he stayed out of reach of the champion's sword. But with lightning moves, he would dart in and strike the champion wherever he was exposed. It was a hot day, and the exertion, the heavy armor, and the wounds soon started tiring the champion. Abdul Basit saw his opportunity and struck a mighty blow to the champion's sword arm, which sent the champion's sword flying. As the champion bent down to retrieve his sword, Abdul Basit put his sword to the champion's neck and asked for his submission. The champion finally gave in. Abdul Basit told the champion that he would spare his life if he would take his army and go away and not return to that area again. Having no other choice, the champion agreed and departed with his army. There was great cheering from the king and his army, but people were puzzled by why Abdul Basit had not killed the champion. He replied that he saw his role as preserving the life of the people, rather than taking the life of a person. By letting the champion live, he had prevented a battle where a number of people on both sides would have been killed. The king asked him where he had learned to fight so incredibly well. He replied that he had been taught by his father, who had learned the martial arts from his father. Abdul Basit said the story of Prophet Dawood, and just as Prophet Dawood's trust in Allah had given him courage to face a more terrifying enemy, he felt confident that Allah would help him as well. Everyone wanted to hear the story of Prophet David. Abdul Basit then explained that what you see when I fight with my sword is not just my skill, but while I hold the sword where it strikes, it is guided by Allah, to whom I give my life over to when I go into battle. It is Allah who determines the outcome, and if you put your trust in Him, He never fails you. The king was very happy when he heard the story. He offered Abdul Basit either of his 2 eldest daughters in marriage, whichever one Abdul Basit chose. To everyone's surprise, Abdul Basit chose to marry Bushra. She was not the eldest nor the prettiest of the king's daughters, because while all the king's daughters were very pretty, Bushra had shown a special fondness and kindness for the pup by Abdul Basit's side. Abdul Basit decided to stay for a while, teaching the people about Islam and narrating many of the stories of other prophets and of Prophet Muhammad. Many of the people turned to Allah, as did the king and his family. Several beautiful masjids were established, and people prospered in a just society. Abdul Basit had accomplished a great task bringing Islam to the people.